Good morning and welcome to this week's programme, a special edition in which we visit the RTE archives to mark the career of the late Albert Reynolds. This morning, Albert Reynolds, a self-portrait, the schoolboy entrepreneur, dancehall promoter, pet food innovator, the lure of politics, his approach to that challenge, his leadership of Fianna Fáil, becoming Taoiseach, the peace process, and much more. Albert Reynolds showed his independence, his innovation, his skills as a dealer very early in life.
I was the only member of the family to go on to secondary school. I got a scholarship in those days to Summerhill College in Sligo. It got you used to getting away from home, made you very independent. You had to make do with what you had. You had to sort of manage your resources, however limited they were, or try to improvise, which indeed I remember I got involved in and others got involved in it. We used to jump over the wall and go down the town in Sligo and bring up bars of chocolate or sweets and sell them at a profit.
And he told John Skehan in this Words and Music interview how he became involved in the dancehall business.
I was working with CIE at the time, and I was secretary to a local carnival committee for raising money for church renovation funds for about 3 years, booking the marquee, booking the bands. At the end of 3 years, when the local priest had enough money got for the church, having made all the arrangements for the following year, for example, he just said, "No, that's enough, I have enough, you do what you wish at this stage." So I went ahead and subsequently it was successful, and a year or two later, the following year, my brother came home, Jim came home from Australia, and we decided this was a business maybe worth trying, so we bought a site for a ballroom beside the house where we were living and built our first ballroom there at Cloudland and Ruski. He built them himself, but I wasn't in that into the business. Mine was more the administration and booking the bands, looking after the money, paying the guys.
And he expanded on this theme and the lessons he'd learned from this business experience in this interview with Maxi when he had just become Taoiseach.
I did get used to in my entertainment days. I mean, in managing ballrooms and managing artists and managing bands, I got used to 7 nights in a week on the road. I mean, they often talked about bands having band managers and road managers called rodeos and things like that, but I had nobody. I drove myself and did the job and drove home again. So I'm used to that, and maybe that's why I was well fitted for politics. But when you get used to nightlife, I mean, there is no other way of life, and I can identify with people who are working at night, driving at night, because I've done it so often myself throughout my lifetime, and I still do it. But the difference now is that I have somebody to drive me, and I can close the eyes and put back the head and sleep.
I heard a rumour about a time that you couldn't have done that because there's a great story about you running out of petrol. Was it Belfast?
Oh yeah, Belfast. I had Kenny Ball over here for 10 days on a tour. You wouldn't believe, Maxie, £35 a night. That's all he got paid.
Oh my goodness.
If he's listening, or any of his band or his families. 1961, 62.
Oh, but £35 is
£35, 10 nights, 350 quid contract. I didn't have £350 at the time, but however, he thought I did. But we signed a contract anyway, and he came, fair play. But by the time he arrived here, this was the trick in that business. If you could identify them on the way up, you could make money. So I identified him as one of the bands of the day coming up, and signed a contract, and here 7-8 months later, on the Monday night that he was in the Ulster Hall in Belfast, he went number 1 in the top 20 with Midnight in Moscow. Number 1. So that was a big hit. £35 a night and having the Ulster Hall jammed to the doors.
I'm not
going to tell. It was seven and sixpence, I think. I think it was Dave Glover was playing the relief band in the Ulster Hall in Belfast, or the Melatones, or a mixture of jazz bands in Belfast. Great city for jazz, great city for music.
I know, I was that soldier. Go on.
Yeah, you were that soldier. You were part of it, weren't you? So
you made a fortune.
On the night, I made a good few quid on the night. But I went up to Belfast. I hired the Ulster Hall, ran the dance, employed people around Belfast to do the door, the bouncers and all that sort of thing. Put the money in the boot of the car, and I'm heading off back to Longford. Because I was working at the time. I was working at CI at the time. I was double jobbing.
A real job?
Oh, yeah, a real job. I had 2 jobs. So, but anyway, on the way down, I noticed that the petrol barometer was going very low, and I couldn't believe it because I had filled it. So obviously it was the petrol was sucked out of the car. Somebody got stuck for petrol and sucked it out, and it was up to me.
Oh.
So I just wondered how far I was going to get. There was no point in stopping. There was no point in going back. I didn't know any place in Belfast that I could knock up to get petrol, so I continued on. And there's a guy thumbing along the roadside, so I said, maybe he might know somebody. So I stopped, picked him up, asked him where is he going. Porty down, he says. That's what they call it, Porty down. So I said, okay, and I said, I'm going farther than that, but I hope that you might be able to help me, because I says, I'm not going to have enough petrol. We may or may not get to Porty down. I hope we do, but if we do, I hope that you might be able to assist me in getting some petrol for the car. And he said, fine, we'll try it. So we drove on to Portydown, and I said, where do I go? He says, drive down to the RUC station. I drove into the RUC station. All the sandbags are up. There was an IRA campaign in the 50s, so they hadn't really gone back to full normality. So I drove in, and I said, fine, would you ask these people here? He said, fine. So he went in, he came out in about 10 minutes, and he had 2 RUC officers with him. And they said, good night, and we hear your problem, and, we'll do what we can. We're going down to try and wake the guy down the main street. So we did now, got filled up with petrol. Said goodbye to the RUC officers, and indeed the man who I've never known before or since, didn't even ask him his name. He didn't ask me my name, and off we went about our business, and I got home about 4:30 in the morning. So I can appreciate people driving through the night. Money in the boot of the car, no petrol, in an area that wouldn't be all that exciting for a lot of people passing through during the night at that particular time, or even now, I'm certain either. But nevertheless, this is what has brought me interested in Northern Ireland. I have known them down through the years, good, straight-talking, tough people, good business people, but indeed, when you say them straight what you believe in, I think they respect you more than trying to tell them different stories to different people. I learned that much, and I think it has stood to me since.
Albert Reynolds became a very successful businessman, bringing a lot of employment to County Longford, as these tributes to him, paid this week when he died, attest.
A very good businessman. He took chances. He had full confidence in himself. He was a very good worker.
I thought he was the most wonderful man ever that Longford ever got as a Taoiseach.
And he became involved in newspapers. For his series on Irish newspapers, Hugh O'Ram spoke to Albert Reynolds about his involvement in the Longford News. And this is taken from the original field recording before edited extracts were chosen for the final programme. Some of this material may be being broadcast here for the first time.
There were two newspapers in Longford, the Longford Leader and the Longford News, and Vincent Gill was more or less a one-man show with the Longford News, although he did have 1 or 2 working for him, but nevertheless it was always regarded as a one-man show. He had it through good and bad times for about 40-odd years, and he was coming to the stage where he wanted to pass it on to somebody, but he always had the fear that if he put it up for sale that somebody might have bought it, like the Longford Leader, and closed it down. That he didn't want to happen. So he looked around for somebody whom he felt might have the resources to keep it going. Newspaper business, as we all know, is difficult to make money, and especially in provincial papers. So he approached me, or one of his friends mentioned to me that he wanted to see me about it. So we talked about it a few times. I bought it, I think, on a number of occasions from him, but when it came to the time of finishing off the deal, he didn't want it. It was very difficult for him. It was his whole life was wrapped up in it. So I never pushed the idea. I just left it to himself, and eventually it came around, and he said the only reason, 2 reasons he was selling it to me. One, on the basis that I give him my word I wouldn't sell it to the Longford Leader, that I wouldn't allow it to be closed down, that I keep it going after his day. And secondly, that because his grandmother's name was Reynolds, he had found out in his research that he felt that he had some connection. He was passing it on to somebody who had some connection and name with it. And I agreed with him on those terms, and only on the basis that he would continue to write a column up to the time that he died. And he did. In fact, he died in the St. Joseph's Hospital in Longford with a column half finished for that week's Longford News.
So what brought Albert Reynolds then into politics?
Well, there were friends of mine who talked me into the politics down in Longford, where they said I was running a business at the time. I was running a manufacturing business, making food for cats and dogs and selling a lot of it over in Britain. I supply all the good stores over there. And the same with the continent. But people told me that, I could still do a political job and still run my business. It was pretty well organised, and my family were, a number of them were on the way to being reared. Although I have to say that my wife Kathleen did all the rearing on them, because I was on the night shift, as somebody says, travelling the country. But be that as it may, they said I could do a reasonably good job to represent County Longford, where I was, and Westmeath, and that I could do it and still run my business because I was reasonably well set up to do it. So I felt for that persuasion, thinking that I could still do it and run my business. But I mean, a year and a half after I'm into politics, I'm appointed a member of the government, of the cabinet. Given the tough job in Ireland of reorganising the whole telecommunications industry in Ireland, and transport and communications. So a year and a half later, I'm appointed Minister of the Government, and I have to make a decision then, do I stay in politics or do I go for business? So I decided to stay in politics to try and prove to myself that I could improve Longford and Longford County for the people I represented, and indeed given now the chance to do something for the country and for Ireland, that I was going to take up that challenge. And I was given the most challenging job in the government, so I couldn't resist the challenge, and I went for the change and I went for the challenge. And I think Ireland is well equipped now with a modern telecommunications system.
But the political system and how things worked could perplex Albert Reynolds. This was an advantage. He was a dealer. He wanted to get things done. As Minister for Transport,
I had a task force who was trying to introduce bus lanes in Dublin, and there were so many problems between various departments of public bodies, like the Department of the Environment, like Dublin Corporation, like the Garda Síochána, like CIE and everybody else. And here was I as Minister for Transport with no statutory responsibility trying to do this job, but I didn't control the people who really had the power in that area. So I said, look, I can't understand this because it's a simple operation, I says, to measure the road. We had consultants who would come in and told us where we could put them, how to do it, and I couldn't understand the nonsense and the time it was taking to put down bus lanes on the road. It was a brush, a bucket of white paint and a brush, and I says, if you're long more at it, I go out and do it myself.
Albert Reynolds was a popular minister. He took risks. Some of his friends told him he might have taken one too many when he was enticed to make this celebrated appearance on the Mike Murphy Show.
Closer to the fall.
When I worked for Borden and Mona, I never thought I'd end up as Minister for Energy in charge of Borden and Mona. When I worked for CIE, I never thought I'd end up as Minister for Transport, certainly not. When in various times through life, I never really believed I'd end up where I am. But I accept any challenge that's put to me. I give it my best shot, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. I'm prepared to pay the price.
And you can tell your friend they're with you. He'll have to go. Yes, you can tell your friend they're with you. He'll have to go.
And in time, somebody was told that they'd have to go. After the 1989 election, when Charles Haughey formed what was to be his last government, there was talk of Albert Reynolds as a potential successor. There was a vote of no confidence in Charles Haughey at a parliamentary party meeting. Reynolds, though not a conspirator, voted against his leader.
I will be there whenever the leadership comes up, but I will not be, as you might term it, an assault on the leadership at all. I'm there to do a job on behalf of the party. The depth of feeling that was there at that party yesterday, and only one TD that I recall attacked my position, but as I say, most of them were sad that it had come to that. We're very appreciative of the manner in which I carried out my job, and indeed my Pádraig Flynn and the other ministers of state. All the younger progressive people were there to say that they believed it was time for change. And I think the important part was that most people said, yes, it's time for change. It's only a question of when and the manner in which it happens.
And it happened within months.
I am extremely honoured indeed to be the choice of my colleagues to lead the Fianna Fáil party in the 90s.
Albert Reynolds had inherited the leadership of Fianna Fáil and the office of Taoiseach from Charles Haughey. But that Fianna Fáil government was in coalition with the Progressive Democrats, a first time for the party to be in coalition. And he famously called it, and there was a microphone present, a temporary little arrangement.
I hope that the temporary little arrangement that we have with our junior partners won't be there all that long and we'll be back to where we were starting out.
And he repeated the point in somewhat different terms at the party's Ardèche.
Let me tell you that I have one simple aim, and I want this party to share it with me. You know what that aim is. I know what that aim is. That aim is single-party government.
He failed to win an overall majority in his first election in 1992. Indeed, Fianna Fáil's result was much worse than any of Charles Haughey's 5 elections, and indeed the worst in over 60 years. But the dealmaker in Reynolds emerged, and he formed an unlikely coalition government with the party which had enjoyed its best ever result in 1992, Dick Spring's Labour Party. 2 years later, Albert Reynolds was pleased with how this government was performing.
I think rarely in a political leader's lifetime do you set out a few top priority political objectives and live long enough or stay in power long enough to be able to deliver on them. And this has happened in quite a considerably short time as far as I'm concerned, because the first day I came into this job, I set myself 2 political objectives. One was to try and bring peace to Northern Ireland, recognising the very severe difficulties that were there, that Northern Ireland has been recognised as a sort of a graveyard for both Irish and British politicians, and everybody saw that as trying to attempt the impossible. I wonder, was I serious with myself when I set up that objective? And the other one was to turn the economy around and try and create more jobs for all the young people in Ireland. I have to say that 2.5 years down the road, we're there more or less, insofar as one can say we're there. We certainly have a ceasefire in 6 weeks now. We have a ceasefire from the IRA and a ceasefire from loyalist paramilitaries. So we're certainly set up and poised for an enduring peace in Ireland, and that there's a tremendous quiet sense of achievement in relation to that. And the economy, as far as that's going, it's performing better than any other economies of the 12 member states of Europe, or indeed of the wider OECD. So yes, sometimes you wonder if it's all true.
This is from an interview with Maxi on Late Date.
There is work yet to be done.
Oh yes, we've only 7 weeks into the peace process, but nevertheless, despite provocations, it hasn't broken down. There has been no breaches of it, and I don't believe there will be, because there's such a momentum built up between the 2 communities in Northern Ireland, the divided communities in Northern Ireland, that have been driven further and further apart by 25 years of violence. This is a centuries-old problem. We can't expect miracles. We can't expect it to knit together without difficulties along the way, but we have to manage the peace process and manage those difficulties. And both governments, and indeed both prime ministers, both John Major and myself, have developed an understanding in the last 3-4 years or so that makes us trust each other, and that's why we're able to advance the process. But we have to continue to manage it and make sure that it's there for all time, because I think that's the best thing one can do, either in his position or my position.
Ireland is on the move again. The new beginning has already started. This is a historic opportunity for peace. We hope that everybody will grasp it.
I don't mind what words you use, as long as the effect is that this is the end of the 25 years of armed conflict. That is over. It's behind us. We go on from here. It is a source of immense relief to all of us that the terrible cycle of death has been brought to an end.
I mean, the British people have a very deep interest in this, because they don't want to think in terms of when they go out, are they going to be the subject of bombing in Harrods or Oxford Street or God knows where, tragedies like Warrington, tragedies like Guildford or elsewhere. They want to put all that behind us. And the families and mothers and fathers of the young British soldiers in Northern Ireland, I mean, they just don't know whether they're going to come home alive or dead. So all of that has a big interest for the British public, for the British government and the British Prime Minister John Major, and indeed for the Irish people, both north and south. So I think, we have still a job of work to do, but I believe with the success we've achieved, there's great encouragement to drive on, because the people on the streets in Belfast, they see themselves returning to normal life again. Young people can go out and enjoy themselves. Children can play in the streets like what they were used to. I've spoken to young people up there 20 years, 25 years. They've never seen any other way of life except British Army up and down the streets. I mean, I listened to RTE the other day, and I heard, I think it was in Gay Byrne programme, a woman from Northern Ireland say, when she was asked, has there been change? She says, yeah, not the sort of change I like, because she says, I got a parking ticket from the RUC, and for 20 years they weren't giving out parking tickets. They were involved in other sort of duties, but that's what returning to normality is going to have to mean, I'm afraid.
But as happens in politics, there was a surprise crisis imminent at that time, which brought Labour out of government with Fianna Fáil, and without an election into a John Bruton-led Fine Gael Labour Democratic Left coalition, which cost Albert Reynolds the Taoiseach's job and the Fianna Fáil leadership.
I wish to announce to the Dáil that I intend, following this statement, to go to Áras an Uachtaráin to tender my resignation as Taoiseach and that of my ministers to the President. I will not be seeking a dissolution of the Dáil. And lastly, I want to take the opportunity of thanking Kathleen, my children and my grandchildren for the great support that they gave me in carrying the heavy burdens of office these days. I thank them indeed for their commitment and for staying the course with me, and I look forward, as they do, and there was a very happy family there this morning, to say farewell. Thank you.
In 1997, there was to be a further disappointment when he failed to win the Fianna Fáil nomination as their candidate for the presidency.
Look, it's her day, it's not mine.
The surprise winner at that parliamentary party meeting was Mary McAleese.
I feel very surprised and deeply disappointed with the result. But the democratic right of the party is to choose their candidate. They've done that and I live with it.
But there was a campaign to stop you. There was no doubt there was a lot of strong
I'm not getting into those areas at all. You can evaluate that as you wish and everybody else can.
But you are very disappointed.
Very disappointed, naturally.
In 2001, in his series Na Taoiseach, Andy O'Mahony discussed the 11 leaders who up to that time had led Irish governments. Among those contributing to the addition on Albert Reynolds was Noel Whelan.
But the other thing was, and I think it's a factor of his age also on how he came to power. He wasn't thinking about the next election. Clinton focuses on the next election that he's elected. Blair focuses on the next election that he's elected. Albert never focused on the next election. It's make the decision, do what has to be done, and let's get on. We'll only be here a while.
Was he an anomaly in your view in Fianna Fáil? What you know of, and you know that party well in terms of the kind of political animals in it. Was he anomalous, or
he was never? Fianna Fáil in its history has been very fond of chieftain figures, and Haughey was a chieftain figure. Lynch and Albert was never a chieftain figure. There was never that personal mass support movement for him at any level of the party, and that didn't bother Albert one bit because that's not the way he wanted to operate.
Yes.
I'm not sure that I entirely agree with that.
Another contributor was Fergus Finlay.
I think he, at the end of the day, he wasn't able to sustain a high degree of support within the party. But to this day, I think there are powerful people within Fianna Fáil. Brian Cowan comes to mind immediately, who were spotted by Albert Reynolds, promoted by Albert Reynolds, and are intensely loyal
and still remain to this day.
And I mean that's I guess a strength in a politician as well, that he's able to inspire that kind of loyalty.
In fact, one of the things that led to him actually taking over office,
this is Tom Savage,
was the fact that the people who initially set the fuse were the Young Brigade. It was Sean Power, it was MJ Nolan, it was Noel Dempsey. These are the people now who are very senior, stable figures in Fianna Fáil. And they very much, it wasn't just, again, opportunistic.
And moving on to a broader front, we mustn't forget his excellent relationship with John Major. That was crucial, wasn't it?
I think his relationship with Major was absolutely critical to the peace process.
This is Stephen Collins.
And it was an extraordinary relationship. If you read Major's own autobiography, the foreign leader he speaks about most warmly is Albert Reynolds. They had huge rows, but both men had the ability to have the big row, to walk out in a huff at times, but to come back and to work together to achieve something which has been so important.
The interesting thing was he also had a quite pally relationship with people like Jacques Delors, Helmut Kohl, Francois Mitterrand, and for example, he became a key figure in the succession to Jacques Delors as president of the EU Commission. He was almost the guy who brokered that succession as a result of his very good relationships with all the key players.
And see, that's where I think every now and then he wasn't a man for deep reflection or even for holding grudges, except in very limited areas. But
he could hold a grudge.
but I think that every now and then he would come, if he did reflect, he would look and see that with John Major, with these European leaders, he was accepted. They weren't always questioning him or his right to be there. And yet when he would come home, he would find that in key areas of his own party and outside it, people were always being slightly dismissive of him. Terms like the Longford slash.
His legacy to Fianna Fáil, first of all, Noel?
The first one was the shift in Northern Ireland policy. Going for peace before unity was the most important shift. And I also think that he did give this emphasis that if you got into government and made decisions, I always say, God forbid, if I was ever Taoiseach, I'd much prefer to have his 2.5 years of achievement than a decade or decade and a half that some of the others have. Because Haughey was completely dominant but completely insecure and afraid to make hard decisions. And Albert, because he had personal security, self-educated, self-made, personal security, he was prepared to take those risks to make the decisions. They brought his downfall, they brought his successes.
Legacy to Fianna Fáil, Stephen.
Well, I think he left a traumatised party after he departed, but the party recovered very quickly. Bertie Ahern, who succeeded him as leader, won the following election. The party was stunned for about a year to find itself in opposition, but it found itself back in government. I think the fact that he gave them the peace process was something that made Fianna Fáil very proud, and it helped Fianna Fáil to redefine its whole view of nationalism, which I think was very important for the party.
On the negative side, I suppose people will always wonder how he was the cause of two governments falling. But more broadly, his legacy on the positive side will be what? Northern Ireland?
I think Northern Ireland.
This is Dick Walsh.
And I think that he asked a key question, which is quoted by Stephen in his book. When he said about the provost, what do they want weapons for? Look, they're either at war or they're in politics. If they're in politics, they don't need guns. Full stop. Now, that is as clear a statement as you're going to get on decommissioning and the need for clarity about decommissioning and that kind of issue. And he was...
maybe Tom, history will see him as a really very important figure.
And they will see him for two reasons. The one that has been mentioned here already, which is his role. I don't think anyone should say it was an exclusive role in the activation of the peace process. And the second one, I think, was in changing the nature of the relationship with Britain. Because if you think about it back, up to then, this was always going to be key to any future, and yet no Irish political leader could have a relationship that seemed to say we can do business in an open way without the baggage of history, without the suspicion of each other. And through his relationship with Major and through his approach, I think that was a fundamental change.
And I suppose the collapsing of governments is neither here nor there.
No,
in the context of the bigger
him
picture.
It must be a huge tragedy.
And those verdicts from Andrew Mahoney and Michael Campion's series Na Taoiseach, first broadcast in 2001. This morning's programme was to mark the many careers of former Taoiseach Albert Reynolds, who died this week. More voices from the archives at the same time on Sunday morning next. Thank you for listening, and good morning.